Good evening. Thank you for coming. I don't know why you're sitting at the back, but anyway, near the bar. Very nice to welcome Anders to the building from Office 10, and thank you, Curti, for the introduction. And he's going to talk about a really interesting project called the Greenest House. I mean, I haven't seen it. I've read about it, and ostensibly it's a kind of, let's say, a retrofit. It's in that field, but it's very much design-based, and I think that's the important thing. I think for you, I think a lot of people talk about retrofit, but sometimes it's about technical solutions and overcladding things or whatever, which is fine. But you know, we're design school here, and I think that's really important. So I think this project kind of bridges and crosses into that territory, which is super interesting. So thank you very much for coming to Greta Talk. I'd forgotten it's Crit Week, so I'm sorry about the audience isn't as big as it should be, but thank you very much for coming. Thank you.
Thank you. Do I need that one? Or?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Great, thank you. Right, so thank you for coming. I'm going to talk about a project called Greenest House, which is something that we have started in our practice. That's Office 10 architecture. And it's not really a talk about like architecture or our practice. It's more sort of about an idea and how we're trying to make that idea a reality. It's sort of a system or a structure that's in place in order to make architecture. That's how we think about it. And hopefully also a way for architecture to become sort of a catalyst for change. So it can kind of take with it. Because architecture requires a lot of resources. And then by doing all of that, maybe we can do something else along the way. You are all students, many of you, here at the university. And when you're finished, you're probably going to go, I hope you're going to go and do your part 3 and then become architects. Maybe not all of you, but some of you. And if you're very efficient, maybe you spend like 7 years doing that. But during those 7 years, very little has actually been said about what needs to be in place for architecture to happen. I mean, you learn about how to become good designers, but how do you make architecture happen in the first place? It involves a lot of different things. I mean, often we have politicians criticizing kind of our profession and saying, why don't we build something beautiful like we used to? Often it's a bit sort of a conservatively leaning politician that says that. And I think the kind of correct response is that architecture is something that grows out of its economic system. I mean, you can't really look at architecture without understanding the economic situation that it finds itself in. And these are kind of, I think, two extreme examples of what architecture can do in different economic contexts. The one on the left, if you don't know, it's Elemental, sort of social housing project where the whole idea was that you build something and then you leave something else for people to fill in once they have the means to do so. And this just went there the other week, so I thought about this when I put the presentation together. This is Villa La Rotonda in Vicenza by Palladio, which is the other end of it. It's not there to sort of it's much more to kind of display wealth. Just going to check my notes a little bit. To create architecture, you can say that you need 3 things. You need a suitable site, you need a client or an occupant, often that's the same person, and you need a means to pay for it, or the kind of the resources. And this is always controlled by somebody else, or most of the time controlled by somebody else than the architect. So we're kind of left with trying to square the circle of coming out of the architectural education, which is all about design and all about kind of expressing yourself and finding like your way of doing things, into a market where, you know, architecture is a service and you have to kind of fulfill these needs for the clients, and if you don't do it very well, somebody else is going to get the job. So I guess Greenest House is in a way a response to this, where we try to take control of some of these points. So I'm just going to say very briefly a little bit about us and kind of give the context of where Greenest House sort of comes out from. So this is me and Erica. So we've started Office 10 Architecture 7-8 years ago. And we've mainly worked with existing houses. Of course, kind of architects in London, they start out and they do residential extensions. That's the kind of the low-hanging fruit. Projects are easy to get, but it's quite fun work. You get to sort of be very involved in a lot of different things, but we also do new builds when we can, but even then, you know, it's always in a very sort of tight context. So either there are buildings around, or we need to knock something down or readjust it. But 90% of the projects that we do have to do with existing buildings. Yeah, so this is another example where we kind of, it's all about maximizing the space with existing buildings, try to make something better out of the existing situation. Because there's always kind of a lack of space in London. And we did once a quick calculation looking at the average square meter price in London, which I think is about £35,000, and what space you kind of have wasted. You know, clients, they'll say like, oh no, I can't afford like a fitted wardrobe or something, and then they buy something and they have this wasted space next to the wardrobe, and actually that space is worth more than just buying a nice fitted wardrobe. So out of that idea, we started designing and building. So this was like a prototype kitchen that we did in our office, and that kind of became a way to overcome these sort of problems, and a great way to do design projects that are a bit more immediate than architecture, because architecture is something that always takes a very, very long time. So that's just some examples of, this has kind of been something that we've grown into our practice, and now that we do this for our clients, we design, build, and install kitchens and all sorts of different things. So, in fact, we set up our own company now to do those kind of things, called 10 and Sen. And then, Erica, the other half of Office 10, she's been teaching for at least a decade, I think, at various different places, at Oxford Brookes and at the AEA currently. But 3 years ago, we got invited to have a design unit at Greenwich, which we were doing for 3 years. And we thought immediately when we got that invitation that we should work with existing buildings, because that's kind of what we deal with every day. And it's also, I think there's some statistics saying that so 80% of the buildings that will be here in 2050 have already been built. So it's a kind of a situation that we can't really get away from as architects. We have to find strategies for how we kind of redevelop, use existing structures. I mean, you have the situation that they're there, and then you have the situation that demolishing and rebuilding costs a lot of energy and has a huge carbon footprint. So, you know, what are the strategies that we can come up with? Yes, so that's kind of what we do in the practice. But some years ago, we were refurbishing our own place, doing it up, and we had just paid £8,500 in deposit for an air source heat pump. And I think we were about here in the project when the air source heat pump installers called and said, no, sorry, you can't do that because there's not enough space for the engineers to come and do maintenance for the pump. We had sort of found a place up on the roof we thought we could put it. And because this is a flat, we didn't have access to the rear garden. So, you know, there wasn't any place that you could put the air source heat pump. So we had to sort of return to gas boiler, unfortunately, and sort of just think about this is something that we will have to do the next time. But yes. So in the office at that time, we had a lot of projects that were kind of similar in the sense that clients, people today, everybody wants to do, we want to do lots of sustainable things. And we think it's great, okay, let's design something that's, you know, has lots of high U values and using sustainable heating systems, et cetera, But then they get the quote, and then they go, that's a bit expensive. So maybe we can reduce the building. No, I think we need to have a big building. We'll just have to do it the standard way. So a bit kind of frustrated with how slow the process is to kind of implement the things that we kind of all know needs to happen in our sector in terms of reducing both the embodied carbon and also the operational carbon. We found that there are three main obstacles. There's the cost, as I just described. Then there is the legislation and planning policy. So that's the apartment there where we didn't have the space for the air source heat pump, and planners won't allow you to put it in the front garden for some reason. And then one point that I haven't really touched upon, which is knowledge. And what often happens is that you have builders, they'll talk to the clients and they'll say, no, don't do it that way. Don't do it the way the architect said. Do it the way I've always done it for the last 20 years. Don't change anything. Let's just do it the way we've always done it. So getting contractors to understand what needs to happen for the new systems to be implemented can be a long learning process. And then, of course, there is no guarantee that that contractor will be on the next project. So, you know, it takes time. But we kind of wrote down these three key points that we wanted to try to implement. I should say that we, before we wrote down these points, we were sort of thinking, the idea was, what can we do as architects, really? I mean, I was criticizing the politicians earlier for criticizing the architects, but if we actually think, what can we do as architects, instead of just trying to blame other people, we thought, okay, if we could become the client, could we then do these changes? So that's when we found these three obstacles and these 3 points which is about making the most out of what's already there, adding value to existing structures or spaces, and the sort of key principle that the greenest house is the one that's already there. Having gotten that far, we realized that what we need is a system. We need some sort of kind of structure which can kind of facilitate economic, environmentally sustainable development, but it also has to be economically sustainable, because we knew that with clients, they don't want to go ahead with something if it's too expensive. And how do you kind of get the money there? So we looked at our sort of traditions, systems, structures that are in place in our own countries where we're from. So Erica's from Japan, where they have this amazing shrine. I'm not sure this drawing is actually the Ise shrine, because I see something in the back there which I'm not sure is there. But anyway, if you've ever been to the Ise shrine, it's an amazing place for many different reasons. But one is that they have these processions with offerings to the gods that live in the shrine. And if you've seen Spirited Away, all those gods in the bathhouse, that's sort of the Shinto religion gods, and they require you to kind of give them stuff. So this is a procession that gives sake or rice or something to the gods. And then another reason why it's a very interesting place is that they have actually two sites right next to each other. And every 20 years, they rebuild the main shrine exactly like the old one. The picture here shows kind of a thing that only happens once every 20 years, when both shrines are standing. So you have the new one on the left, and then the old one that's been there for 20 years. And as soon as that's been built, this one is they don't demolish it, but they kind of take it apart, and all the pieces are then distributed to all the other Shinto shrines, minor shrines in Japan, and they use it for maintenance and replacing elements, because this is kind of the holiest. You can imagine kind of, there are these great forests around Ise. And in these forests, they grow the timber that's being used in making the temple. And you can kind of imagine that all these people here, they're the craftspeople, or the carpenters, the blacksmiths that makes the tools for the carpenters, or the farmers that grow the rice, or the fishermen that fish the fish, or the people that make the salt, and so on and so on. It's this huge community that exists and have managed to retain the knowledge of how to make this shrine in the exact same way for 1,300 years. It's never changed. What you have then is a system for maintaining knowledge and an economic model that supports the wide community. And it's all based around these cycles of the daily processions, and also about every 20 years they rebuild it. Now, Norway, where I'm from, it's not as cultured a nation as Japan is, but we have a tradition which is probably as old as the Ise shrine, and there's something called dugnad. And I found a definition on BBC about dugnad, and it's a Norwegian cultural concept for collective, voluntary community work rooted in historical practices of mutual aid and communal tasks, often followed by a social gathering. So you can imagine if you live in a farm in Norway, and everybody is a farmer or a fisherman or something like that, and you have no money, there is no like builder around, you have to do everything yourself. But larger tasks you can't do yourself, so everybody comes together and they build a house, replace the roof, and then next time your neighbor needs you, you will come to them. So you have you have sort of a common goal, shared interest. And this is something that continues, because this is kind of when I was a kid. So all blocks of flats or football associations or something, they'll have dugnad. And then everybody comes together, nobody gets paid, but you do the sort of maintenance work that is needed, or you have like a cake sale or something like that, and then you do something social afterwards. So we thought, so we thought, yeah, the cycles are important to maintain the knowledge, and sharing a common goal is important for people to participate. So if we can make enough money to keep the process going, we don't need big profits. And if we can find the people who are also interested in this outcome, and we share a goal, then we can find our partners. So I'll get back to this diagram a little bit later, but that's sort of the model that we started coming up with, which is all about this sort of cycle of redevelopment, and it has to do with the retaining the knowledge and also kind of keeping the profits within the building itself. I'll explain a bit more detail in a minute. So we were also looking then at sort of other things that we could do in our practice, and I touched upon it, like kind of can we, instead of doing lots of extension work and so on, do upgrades that are needed, but instead just make buildings more efficient. So this is a project for a couple of musicians, which is all about just making the spaces not bigger, but better. We had kind of that idea in our mind at the same time. And then we got an email from the European Cultural Centre asking us if we wanted to take part in the 2025 Venice Biennale. And we just thought, yeah, well, okay, we don't really have anything to show. I mean, we like what we do, but we don't really feel that it's of international quality. But I was sort of cycling home from work one day, and I passed by this building site. It was doing a lot of demolition, and I thought, wait a minute, maybe this is, because we've been struggling with it for a while. How we have this idea of the Greenest House, but how do we get it started? How do we find our partners and so on? And we thought, okay, maybe this is it. We'll say yes to the European Cultural Centre, and we'll say we're going to exhibit the Greenest House, and then we'll just have to figure out how to do it. So in order to find sort of our dugnad partners, we became members of the Alliance for Sustainable Building Products, the UK Green Building Council, and we were already signatories to Architecture Declare. And Erica spent, I think, a month just calling around to all the other members of these organizations that we thought could become our partners, that would share sort of a common goal in doing these retrofits. And we managed to, before we went to Venice, we managed to find 5 companies that were willing to back us for and be partners in this idea. So we have Adaptivate, who make some kind of cutting-edge lime-based plaster that's a carbon negative, I think they even say. Bruins & Co. that make linseed paint. Cleveland Steel, which is, steel isn't something that we should use too much because of its high carbon footprint, but they have, what they do a lot of is repurposing steel. which can reduce the carbon footprint of the steel by 90%. Then we had EcoDuct, that make insulated ductwork, and sisal wool, that make insulation from coffee sacks and wool. And since then, we've managed to get more partners. So we went to Venice. We were just there, actually, when we went to see Palladio. We were down there to have a talk, and we got to meet lots of people doing very interesting projects all around the world. And it feels like there's a sense of, in the architecture community internationally at the moment, that there's a sort of a phase of regeneration, that's what everybody's thinking about. How can architecture sort of become part of the solution rather than the problem? Let's see, where am I in my notes? Right. So that's where it's sort of the genesis of the project. There's kind of a long way to talk about where it's coming from, but I think that kind of tells you the building blocks that was in place and where the idea came from. So let's explain a little bit what the actual idea is. Yeah, so we know we need housing. So, and we know that we have a lot of houses that are not in a very good condition. We know that we have a climate emergency, so we need to do something about the houses. And we also know that when we do big sort of demolitions and we build big new blocks of flats, communities get destroyed in the process. So we thought, what about not demolishing, right? So the Greenest House is the one that's already there. So we don't demolish. And we started looking at the most sort of common existing property, perhaps in the UK, which is the terraced house. And so we thought, okay, can we extend and add to this property? So that means it's nothing really kind of new here. This is what people do. But by extending and subdividing the house into flats, you can increase the value quite a lot. And then, importantly, you don't extract the value, right? You take the profit, or as much of the profit as you can, and reinvest it back into the house. And that's how you, because people do this. People buy houses, rundown houses, they split them into flats and they make a profit. But they do it in the cheapest possible way very often. So that's not what we want to do. Instead, we want to upgrade and make their houses fit for the future. So yeah, back to this diagram. This just shows the cycle, because what we want to be able to do is, we know that you can do a one-off project, right? We've seen a lot of really good one-off projects in terms of sustainable architecture, but it's a drop in the ocean, right? They might sort of be good in the sense that they give people inspiration, or they get publicized and they create awareness, but the actual energy saved compared to how much we need to get to is very small. So if we want to have an impact, we need to have a model that can be scaled. And also, we need to have a model that can retain the knowledge. Because if you come up with all these solutions during the design and construction of a building, but then as soon as the project is finished, everyone that's worked on the project just goes and works on different projects and nobody talks to each other again, then that knowledge is completely lost. So learning from ISE, where they have these 20-year cycles where you start as an apprentice, then you sort of the journeyman, and then the master, the third time you're there after 40 years. This can kind of keep on going. So you acquire a house, you increase the size and double the units, and therefore increase the value. You don't extract the value, but you invest it into the property, and then people can move in, and then you can sell it, and then you can buy a new one. And so you can keep on going. Of course, this can be done with any existing property. You just have to, there is obvious places where it works better than other places. It works well in London or southeast of England, where property prices are high, because your uplift in value is larger in actual pounds, so you can pay for more material. You can pay for air source heat pumps and solar panels and so on. If you do it in places where house prices are low, it won't work as well. But this is just an example of, one side of the street is Greenest Houses, and on the other side it's the old houses. And one thing that we have done to make sure that we improve upon the kind of current model for splitting up terrace houses is that we've included an extra stair. And that's just to kind of make sure that, you can see the mouse, right? So we have an extra, so this is the original stair here, and then we add another stair. That means that the loft and half of the first floor can be a smaller flat that's suitable for a single person or a couple. And then the larger flat, which then becomes the ground floor and half the first floor, has access to the garden. Because often what happens is that the first floor and the loft becomes the larger flat, which is suitable for a family, but they don't have access to the garden. So that's just the model showing that in 3 dimensions. So we are now sort of in the process of trying to get this actually built. There's a lot of stuff that still needs to be done. This is an energy assessment done by Jaw, which is one of our partners, and it concluded that by doing this, we would reduce the CO2 emissions by 90%, or 75% if you compare to standard building regulations. So if you then can extend this over many houses, you can start having an impact. Right, so in terms of the actual architecture, as I said, we've not trying really to reinvent the wheel, but make slight incremental sort of improvements to things. So I mentioned the introduction of an extra stair, and then try to use sort of glass to bring light in, because the terrace houses are notoriously dark in the middle once you start extending them. A little light well and some glass to get the light in. Trying to prevent these sort of the long unusable corridors and use them at least sort of visually within the spaces, so that it's not just blocked off with a door, but it's something that you can kind of appreciate, even though you can't quite get around having corridors. Yeah, and then making sure, instead of extending over the rear outrigger, making sure that every space has sort of external space, because that's quite important to have a happy life. And then just small things like having an overhanging roof to avoid overheating in summer, because we now know, even London summers can get very hot. It has really changed the last 10 years I've been here, or more than 10 years. Anyway, that's my presentation. That's the Greenest House. That's where we are at the moment. We are kind of working on getting funding at the moment. We're working on developing the details and getting. I think we didn't quite appreciate how much work it would be trying to get something going. We meet a lot of resistance because people go and say, oh, well, it's not really a product that you're going to make a lot of money on. I'm not sure we want to back you. So trying to sort of have a social purpose can sometimes be actually a detriment. Who would have thought? Yeah, that's where we are. I don't know if you guys have any questions.
Thank you very much. Yeah, do you have some questions from the audience? Is that on? Yes, I think so. Yes, there's one.
Thank you so much for the lecture. I just wanted to ask, based on the kind of diagram that you had and the steps into accomplishing the Greenest House, one of the steps was increase the size. So let's say we follow what the Isa Shrine is also doing, and every 20 years we're changing what the structure is. Let's say in 100 years, would that mean that the building or the house, whatever it is, will be 5 times bigger or taller?
No. The Isa Shrine is more the kind of what we're taking from the Isa Shrine isn't the idea that we do it the same place every 20 years, but more the idea that there's a cycle, and having a cycle means that you can retain the knowledge. So they've managed to maintain all the skills associated with rebuilding the house in the exact same specifications for 1,300 years, which is, I mean, if you're in Europe, going back 1,300 years and having people rebuild things exactly from that time, I don't think anyone really has that skill anymore. So it's more about the idea of creating a cycle and repeating the cycle in order to get better at something. I mean, I'm sure your tutors have told you need to do iterations of your work. You know, okay, you've done one plan. Let's see another plan where you improve these things, and that's kind of what this is. So we're hoping that the first project that we do, we will learn a lot. Hopefully not too much, and we can keep on going, so we get better results every time, and maybe manage to push the price down, and manage to kind of do more with the same resources.
Julian, do you have an?
Hello. Hi. I'm just wondering whether you don't mention Passive House and the AECB's Carbon Light, which are both quite Passive House retrofit, and the Carbon Light scheme that's run by the AECB, which are both sort of quite established ways of looking at retrofit, particularly for domestic dwellings. So I just wonder, because they're quite major sort of things in the field.
Yeah, absolutely. We don't like to kind of promise lots that we are not sure that we can deliver. And this project revolves around it being economically sustainable, right? So that the cycle can continue. So it will have to be assessed on sort of a project-by-project basis, how far you can take all the different measures. Now, passive house is famously very difficult to achieve. You have inefficient, which is sort of the passive house for retrofits, but still, we don't want to sort of tie ourselves to getting a certification. I mean, we want to do as much as possible with the funds available, rather than trying to sort of like crash the project because we're promised too much. But the energy assessment that we did was based on the LETI, the London Energy something network, which is has standards for what you should try to achieve in terms of insulation values and air tightness and all sorts of things. So that's kind of what we are saying to ourselves that we want to achieve, the LETI standard, but we haven't so far really thought about passive house because we don't want to, as I said, get too bogged down into these very specific criteria. We want to have flexibility to keep the momentum going.
Okay, thanks. Thank you. I've got a lot of questions to do with ownership and the development model if you're an owner-occupier and how you then split the house and move presumably into one section of the new double house. But I'm going to pass those by for the moment. I've got a specific question which is really to do with what you talked about, the kind of voluntary labour and how that might connect to this. And when I've been involved in, I did co-housing, was known as sweat equity, which is putting your own labour into the house. And I just wondered within this whole cycle that you've developed, how that fits in, because I couldn't quite see it.
Yeah. So the Dugnad model, maybe I didn't explain it very well, but it's more the idea of coming together around a shared goal. Now, we wouldn't be able to have an economically sustainable model if everybody were doing things for free, because I mean these are the partners are companies that have to pay their bills and their salaries, and so must we. But at the same time, we don't necessarily need to get lots of profit as dividends and so on. But we thought from the Dugnad, we sort of pulled this idea that if you can get people to share a common cause, then they're willing to sort of be part of it. And our partners, they've already contributed quite a lot in terms of helping out with various, like you saw, for example, Joel did the energy assessment. And I think also we have a sort of tacit understanding that when we do the first project, we'll get some good rates on some of the materials and so on to sort of make sure that we can kind of get this process underway. But we're very much thinking that everybody should get paid for their involvement, if that answers your question.
Well, yes, no, but I'm sort of wondering about this, how you could use that to make it work. I mean, there are instances in where we did the co-housing was in Stroud, and there was a thing called the Stroud Pound, and so we bartered. So my second fix plumbing was done by somebody who I did the envelope of a house they were restoring a few miles away. And I'm just wondering about how you get this, because you're challenging an economic model that exists of people splitting houses, usually pretty badly, into 2 units and renting one and occupying the other, or renting both, or there's a whole number of economic models related to ownership. You're trying to split that, and I'm just thinking, how do you leverage this collaboration and this cooperation between owners, occupiers, tradespeople, and so on and so forth? It seems to me a really interesting and really fertile area, this kind of collaborative model. So I'm just thinking, because you haven't built one of these yet, is that right?
No, we haven't.
Yeah. So I'm thinking, where's the fertile ground this thing lands and actually begins to grow? And one model house leads to another one, and so on and so forth. And it just seems to me that, particularly since you mentioned it.
How did you organise this? What was the pound called?
It's called the Stride pound. It's called a let, but that's because they borrowed.
Yes, is that the type of money that loses value over time, and you need to pay for it? Otherwise?
No, it was pure barter.
Okay.
And there was a more sophisticated one in Bristol. They've reactivated it, which is, broadly speaking, a bit like the transition town movement that makes sure that the money stays within the locality.
Yeah.
It's a bit of a red herring within this conversation, but I am thinking about how do you get this thing going, making the most of the fact that you presumably have like-minded people who are going to put certain values before the raw profit that most people doing development are putting first. And I'm just thinking how you might leverage that. I mean, I think it's a really interesting thing to...
Well, I'd be very interested to talk to you about this later, because this is point number 5 here, which is, join us, because we understand that we are not the experts on all of these things. We just have sort of an idea, which we think could be a good sort of vehicle for driving change, but we need specialists to help us, and we need ideas. So normally when I talk about these things, I'd make a bit more of make a bit more out of this point. If you want to have a chat afterwards, that'd be interesting.
Any questions over this side of the room? Very, very quiet over here. No. I just wanted to thank you for the talk, Anders. I sort of wondered, I travel by train into London, through South London, and you see some streets of terrace houses that have been, you see a kind of model of some house, of sort of an extension, roof extension. As you say, some more successful than others. And you see where something's obviously gone quite well, and the same firm, or maybe the same builders, have kind of worked their way down the street to an extent. And you think, well, okay, that's not so bad. And actually, there's about 3 or 4 quite good versions of something that's probably evolving and getting slightly better, you'd hope. And I just wonder, well, 2 things. One, whether that's something that's sort of worth studying in terms of like looking at this kind of way that everyone adapts their stuff in terms of just constructionally, how you do it. And then whether, with the model that you're talking about, it would be good to involve, if you had a good builder somewhere, a good firm that was involved, that seems important. I mean, because I used to work with a steel fabricator. He ended up doing a big house, like opening up the back of a house in Chiswick or whatever, and someone goes, "Oh, I want one of that." So he started working his way down the street doing, and they were getting better. I mean, okay, maybe that was just for a big fancy kitchen or whatever. It didn't have the sort of social purpose that your project's got, but you could see how it evolved, and actually they got quite good at doing it. A local firm working with other local fabricators, adding in your potential more interesting materials, more interesting technology. You sort of think that is a good team. It's an interesting.
Yeah. So it's a really good point. I mean, we're trying to pursue a number of different avenues to kind of get this going. At the moment, we're open to anything to get it off the ground, and one is sort of getting in touch with local authorities because they sit on a lot of terrace houses, and you can kind of roll this out throughout the borough. We're talking with 2 different contractors. They're quite interested and maybe doing this as some sort of joint venture thing where, because they know they can do many of them, so they take the long view, so they don't need to have so much profit. We're talking with people that are more sort of in investment and banks and building societies and organizations. But yeah, definitely getting a contractor that can do that. One of the things we were thinking, like maybe we should start our own contracting firm to sort of have the full control of this, but I don't know. That's maybe a bit further down the line.
Good idea then. Look. Any more? No. Any more for anyone? Well, look. Thank you very much, Anders. That's very interesting.
Thank you.